Never did I think I would be writing this, but after what happened to me, I have no choice. My name is Wilson, and I was a commercial airline pilot for over 2 decades. Throughout all that time, I faced challenges, storms, technical problems, and even emergency situations, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on February 15th, 2025. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, a routine flight departing from Toronto. I had flown this route countless times. I knew every detail, every procedure. But that day, something got out of control. Something changed forever. I remember arriving at the airport in the early hours of the morning. My co-pilot Ryan was already waiting for me. As always, we followed our safety protocol, checking the instruments, verifying the weather conditions. Everything was perfect. No signs of storms, no technical alerts, no abnormalities at all. It was just supposed to be another day at work. The first hour of the flight passed without incident. The passengers were relaxed, some sleeping, others chatting quietly. The sky was clear and visibility was perfect. But then, without warning, an alert flashed on the cockpit panel. An electrical malfunction. It wasn't uncommon. I had dealt with that before. But before I could even process the situation, another system failed. And then another. Suddenly, everything went dark. The monitors flickered, the controls became unresponsive, the autopilot shut off. The plane began to lose altitude rapidly, as if an invisible force were pulling us down. My instinct told me that this wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was something more. I grabbed the radio and sent an alert. Mayday, Mayday, Flight 527 with total system failure, requesting immediate assistance. But there was no response, no reply at all, as if we were completely isolated. Ryan and I frantically tried to regain control of the aircraft, but nothing responded. The ground was approaching too quickly. I looked at Ryan, and the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. But there was no time for panic. I grabbed the intercom and told the passengers, "Prepare for impact." Those were the last words I spoke before everything went dark. I expected to feel pain, terror, despair, but instead, everything fell silent. I didn't feel my body. I felt no fear, only a profound peace. Then I realized I was no longer inside the plane. I was floating, observing everything from above. Below me, debris was scattered across the ground, flames consuming what remained of the fuselage. I saw rescue teams rushing, pulling bodies from the wreckage. And then I saw my own body. There I was, slumped in the cockpit seat, lifeless. I should have panicked, but I felt nothing but serenity. And then I heard a voice, a powerful, eternal, familiar voice. "Wilson." I turned, and there he was. Jesus. I knew deep in my soul that it was him. It wasn't just a vision. It wasn't an image created by my mind. His presence was indescribable, an overwhelming love that filled everything around me. He looked at me, and in that moment, I knew that he knew everything about me. Every mistake, every regret, every sin, everything was exposed before him, and yet his eyes carried no condemnation, only love. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but I didn't need to. He already knew. He told me that I wasn't there by chance. "You must return," he said. I didn't understand. How could I return if I was dead? But before I could question, he showed me something. The vision I had was more real than anything I had ever experienced. First, I saw the world as it is, people walking the streets, living their lives normally. But beneath that superficial layer, there was something more, something hidden. I saw shadows moving, invisible influences scattered everywhere, houses, schools, churches. These forces were not merely abstract presences. They were real entities working to blind people to the truth. And then I heard the whispers. "Take the easier path. You deserve this. It's okay, God will understand." These voices were everywhere, infiltrating people's minds, leading them to accept small deceptions that, accumulated over time, would drive them away from the truth. I turned to Jesus, and he simply nodded. "Deception does not come with force," he told me. "It infiltrates silently, disguised as good intentions." The scene changed again. I saw a man entering a store, but instead of taking out his wallet, he simply waved his hand over a scanner. Something shimmered beneath his skin. I turned to Jesus. "Is this the mark of the beast?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not yet, but that's how it begins." He showed me how things would unfold. First as a technological advancement, small implants promising safety and convenience. Then dependency. Banks would begin to refuse physical cards, and stores would stop accepting cash. In no time, those without the device would be excluded from the system. I saw hesitant Christians saying it was just technology, that there was nothing wrong. But then Jesus said, "The enemy's greatest deception is not forcing people into darkness. It is making them choose it for themselves." The scene changed again. I saw a family sitting at the table conversing, but something was wrong. Their words seemed rehearsed, their eyes empty. Then I realized what was happening. They weren't just being influenced, they were being programmed. The system controlled them not only physically but mentally. I looked at Jesus, my heart heavy. "Why don't they realize?" I asked. He replied, "Because they have given up the ability to hear me." The pain in his voice was overwhelming. The enemy wasn't just implanting technology, he was silencing the connection between people and God, and most didn't even notice. Then, the vision changed again. I saw those who refused the implant. At first, they suffered, losing jobs, having accounts frozen, being labeled as extremists. But there was something different in them. They had peace. They had light. I saw a man praying and, moments later, someone knocking on his door with exactly what he needed. I saw miracles happening among those who remained faithful. Jesus looked at me and spoke firmly. "My people will not be abandoned." I understood. Just as he sustained Elijah, just as he fed his people in the wilderness, he would care for those who trusted him. The scene changed once more. I saw two futures. In one, those who accepted the system lived without difficulties, but without soul. Their prayers were empty, their faith non-existent. In the other, the faithful, persecuted but spiritually alive. The difference was clear. Then, darkness began to spread. Those with the implant didn't even notice, but the faithful did. And then, a great light emerged from the heavens. I trembled. "What is this?" I asked. Jesus replied, "The separation of souls." The vision vanished, and I was once again before him. "Time is short, Wilson. Some will listen, but you must warn them." And then, I was pulled back. My body burned with pain as I returned. My chest heaved violently. I heard screams around me. The doctors were shocked. "He has a pulse." I had been dead for 7 minutes, but Jesus had sent me back. The hospital room was silent, yet inside me, a hurricane of emotions raged. I knew I had returned for a reason. But how could I tell the world what I had seen? How could I explain something so grand to people who don't even believe there is something beyond what they can see? My body was weak, but my mind was clearer than ever. The mission was clear. I had to warn them. I had to tell the world what was coming. The doctors were perplexed. "He was dead for 7 minutes, one murmured. "That doesn't make sense." The nurses exchanged glances, unable to hide their astonishment. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice weak. One of the doctors leaned over me. "Wilson, do you remember what happened?" I hesitated for a moment. How could I explain what I had seen? I could lie and say I remembered nothing, but I knew that wasn't an option. So, with the little strength I had, I replied, "I saw Jesus." The silence in the room was immediate. Some averted their eyes, others appeared curious, but one of the nurses, a young woman, had tears in her eyes. "What did you see?" she whispered. And then I told. I recounted how I left my body, how I witnessed the accident, how I heard the thoughts of people. I spoke about Jesus, about the vision he showed me, about the deception that was approaching. I talked about the mark, about how people would accept it willingly without even realizing what they were doing. I spoke about those who would resist and about how they would be persecuted yet protected. I spoke of the separation of souls. The doctor's expression was indecipherable. "Wilson, you were dead. Your brain was deprived of oxygen for minutes. It could have been just a delirium, an illusion caused by the lack of oxygen." But the nurse shook her head. "And what if it wasn't?" she asked. "What if he really saw what is to come?" I looked into her eyes and knew she had understood. She felt it. And in that moment, I realized something important. Some will believe, others won't. But that did not change my mission. I had to tell, and those who had ears to listen would hear. The following days were difficult. My body was recovering, but my mind remained on constant alert. I watched the news, paying close attention to every detail. Everything Jesus showed me was already beginning to happen. Small technological advances were being celebrated as major achievements. Companies were testing new forms of digital identification. The system was slowly molding itself into what he had shown me. The churches were silent. Pastors who should have warned their congregations preferred to preach messages of comfort, avoiding talk of the hard times ahead. Some even praised the new technologies, saying they were beneficial, that they would bring more security. I saw Christians accepting these changes without question. "There's nothing wrong with that," they said. But I knew the truth, and I knew that deception was spreading. I saw families being divided. I saw friends arguing about what was right and what was wrong. Some were waking up, realizing that something was off, that the world was changing in a way no one fully understood. Others were becoming increasingly resigned, surrendering their lives to the system without question. Jesus had shown me that the test had already begun. The separation of souls would not happen all at once. It was a slow, gradual process, a series of choices, one after another, until people could no longer turn back. But the most frightening part wasn't just the external change, it was the internal change. The deception did not come in the form of an imposition. It came as an invitation, a call to convenience, to security, to comfort, and people accepted it. They accepted it because it seemed like the right thing to do, because it seemed harmless. And that is what Jesus showed me. The true danger was not in direct persecution, it was in the voluntary choice. The enemy didn't need to force people, he only needed to convince them. He made darkness appear as light, he made the wrong path seem right, and those who did not seek discernment, who did not truly seek God, accepted it without noticing. So, I began to speak. I began to share my story. At first, many laughed and called me crazy. Others ignored me, but some listened, some felt. And it was those people who gave me hope, people who began to pay attention, who began to seek the truth. I knew that time was short, and I knew that soon everyone would have to choose. When that moment arrived, the decision would not be made in a single instant. It would be the sum of all the small choices people had already made. And by the time they realized it, for many, it would be too late. Today, when I look at the world, I see exactly what Jesus showed me. I see people increasingly disconnected from the truth. I see churches surrendering to culture, to the system, to what is convenient. I see a generation being programmed to accept everything that is placed before them, without questioning, without discernment. And I see those who still try to resist being silenced, ridiculed, excluded. Yet Jesus showed me something more. He showed me that despite everything, there will always be a remnant. There will always be those who remain faithful, those who refuse to surrender to the system. And for them, he promised protection. Just as he fed Elijah with the ravens, just as he parted the sea for Moses, just as he sustained his people in the wilderness, he would care for those who trusted in him. But the choice needed to be made now. Because when the final moment arrives, when deception is completely in place, there will be no turning back. So, if you are hearing this, if you feel something inside you saying that something is wrong with the world, please do not ignore it. I am not asking you to believe me blindly. I'm asking you to seek Jesus, pray, read the word, ask for discernment, because deception will come disguised as a solution. It will seem good. You will feel safe. Life will seem easier, but the price will be your soul. I do not know how much time we have left, but I know we are running out of time. What Jesus showed me was not meant to spread fear. It was meant to prepare us. He promised that those who remain faithful will be protected, that even in the darkest moments, his light will never go out. That is why I am sharing this. I do not care if they mock me. I do not care if they call me crazy, because I died. I stood before Jesus, and he sent me back to warn. If there is one thing you need to remember from all of this, let it be this: stay close to Jesus, because the time is coming, and when it comes, you will have to choose. And once that choice is made, there will be no return. Since the day I returned from death, I have never been the same. My body healed, but my soul will never forget what I saw. I am not haunted by fear, but by the urgency of what Jesus showed me. Because the battle isn't coming, it is already here. The deception isn't something that will arise in the distant future. It is already happening, and most people are still blind to it. But once their eyes are opened, they will never be able to stop seeing.